Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
I'm Cliff Roche, and I'm an alcoholic. And I like this place too. I was here, it's like 4 years ago, I think it was, and I had a wonderful experience, and I feel very connected here. And of course, so many people in the room that everybody here can move their lips with my goddamn talk. That's the biggest problem. I'm kind of glad you're in the dark and I can't see your lips moving. But you know, if you get ahead of me, it really pisses me off. It throws me all off. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And I mean, several people said something they were over at Seaside. My God, what was that? That wasn't even a month ago. And I'm just going to have to swallow that. I mean, I can't worry about it. You're here. You knew I was going to be here. What are you going to do? And tonight, tomorrow morning, the 9 a.m. session, I'm going to do a session on the traditions. I think you'll enjoy it. I'm proud of it. I like it. And I don't think we talk about the traditions enough, especially how they affect us in our lives as human beings and as members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, I see there's fewer here today. After this session, maybe there'll be even fewer. I'm going to talk basically this morning about the traditions, and the traditions are, to me, very, very important to me in my sobriety. We read the traditions a lot of times at meetings, you know, and everybody gets their seat. And in my group, I have this huge group there in Carlsbad, and they have a smoke break, and so, you know, we finally got some Dobermans. We get them back from the break pretty well. For a long time, everybody in our group thought there were only two traditions, 11 and 12. You know, by the time they were back sitting down, they could hear. That's all they ever heard. Oh, the two traditions, yes. But there are 12 of them, really. And most people kind of listen or tune them out or whatever it happens to be. But the traditions are very important in our lives. Last night when I was talking about this being a simple program, and it's simple because we don't need philosophy. The reason we get sober and stay sober is because of the examples. You know, we see it demonstrated time and time and time and time again in our lives. And you can poo-poo it all you want. And we get newcomers, you know, who say, well, it's just stupid. It doesn't make any sense that I've been a drunk for 25 years now, and you're going to tell me if I join this bunch of lepers that everything's going to be okay. And, you know, and everybody looks at him and goes, and we don't argue with the guy, or we may laugh out loud at him, which really pisses him off, you know. But the thing is, it has been demonstrated to us many times. You know, I was looking at, this is just a kind of an aside, I was looking at Bill's story last night when I was reading, and he talks about, he sits across the table from Ebby, and he says, there was something about his eyes. You know, that's our founder, and Ebby, of course, died sober, but just barely. He did a lot of drinking after he brought Bill to the program, and so I'm sure all of you know somebody that saved your life. They may die drunk, but they saved your life. But the demonstration was in Ebby's eyes. And that's what hooked Bill and why he listened to the rest of it, of what Ebby had to say. You know, he was all ready to just shine him on. And isn't that true when you see that in the eyes? I don't know how much 12-step work you do, but I do a lot of, you know, and you get some guy and you go to his home and look in his eyes and he has that, you know, the dog on the freeway look in his eyes. You know, just empty and without power and that kind of thing, you know, and get him to one meeting and sit across the table from him in a coffee shop after the meeting and see the power in his eyes. It's an incredible miracle. You just see it happen. And, you know, I've sponsored guys now that have been sober 25 years, and I got to watch the light come on in their eyes and then watch their life change. You know, the demonstrations of how lives change here. Some are more dramatic than others, but some are just so damn dramatic. And later on in the chapter, Bill said, he said, never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted, great change. And that's the way it happens, huh? That's how we got to be 2 million from 2, from one drunk sharing his experience with another. And isn't it interesting that no matter where we come from, no matter what stage of our drinking we are, and that kind of stuff, you know, the 12 steps work. They just work. That's all. I don't care what you're like, no matter what your problem is when you come here, how much you drank, how little you drank, what brand you drank, you know, Chivas Regal or kerosene, it doesn't make any difference. You know, when you get here, the 12 steps work. It just fascinates me. About 15 years ago, we took a meeting up to Laguna Beach. In Laguna Beach on Saturday night, they have a meeting where they ask another group to come in and bring a meeting in. Do you have any of those up here? One group, the whole group goes. Whoever wants to go. We had like maybe 20 people wanted to go, and we went up to Laguna this night. And I was leading the meeting, and I had seen everybody come in to the program who was sharing that night, and I was introducing each person. Some people had 7 months, and some people had, 15 years at the time. Al was 15 years at the time. And, I was just leading the meeting, and so I was just watching people come up there, and I was remembering when they came in. And it was just fascinating. And I flashed back to when I'd been in boot camp when I was a kid in World War II. Remember the war we won? And, yeah, the one we won. And when I was a kid in boot camp, we went into boot camp. I think we were in there 9 weeks or something like that. And when we went into boot camp, there were a whole bunch of guys that were really fat. And there were some really skinny guys, too. And we did this 9-week thing. And at the end of the 9 weeks, the fat guys were a lot skinnier. And the skinny guys were heavier. And we all ate the same shit. You know what I mean? And I mean shit, literally. The exercise of whatever the hell it was good for all of us. And so whatever we needed, we got out of it. And that's what flashed on me when I was at that meeting. Connie, this one gal shared, when she had come in, she was so terrified of, you'd say, hello, Connie. She'd go, she was like that. Just unable to converse. And she got up and shared for a couple minutes. Blah, 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 blah. She only had about a year. And all his confidence. And of course, Al, who's the biggest blowhard in the world, he only shared for 2 minutes. My God, I almost fainted. You know what I mean? The people who needed to expand had, and the people who needed to take a little off had done that. It was the same kind of thing. The steps, the remarkable thing was that these people were all so different, and the 12 steps worked in their lives. Because evidently, at some level, all of us are the same. All of us alcoholics are the same. Every single one of us. And for that matter, the steps come from the 6 steps of the Oxford movement. And the 6 steps of the Oxford movement come from something that's older than time. The process of surrender and confession and restitution and evangelism, that process is older than recorded time anyway. So at some level, probably we're all human beings and the process works. But in our case, the 12 steps, and that's the most brilliant thing I think Bill ever did, was to take the 6 steps of the album and make 12 out of them so retarded people like me could do it a little bit at a time. You know what I mean? I never could have taken 6 steps. 2 biggest steps for me. To hell with that, But he made them into 12, and that was an inspired thing. He thought, what can I do, and took a nap and woke up and wrote the 12 steps. So evidently there was some intervention then. So the steps work because we're all the same. Now the traditions are something else again. I heard an old guy read one night of the traditions, and he said, the traditions are a result of our experience. And I thought, you bet your ass, they're a result of our bad experiences. That's what they're the result of. Every one of the traditions is because our beloved forefathers screwed this thing up one way or another. Bill especially. I mean, they were blowing their anonymity left and right and owning property and, fist fighting. And there was a group in Long Beach. They had this huge surplus, and they couldn't decide whether to have a big picnic or what the hell to do with it. And they got into a big fight, and they all got drunk. The whole group got drunk. They got pissed off at each other. And so, the traditions are, that's very comforting to me to know that our forefathers, the pioneers of this program, they were just like me. They were just goofs, just drunk goofs, full of ego and full of me, my, me, the great His Majesty the baby, And it's really comforting that they weren't in white sheets up on a mountain somewhere drifting around, Mount Olympus or something. And so they wrote the traditions because they could see that they were going to kill this thing if they didn't shape it up somehow. And, of course, all of you probably know that there was a lot of resistance to the traditions. The early guys didn't want any part of the traditions. They didn't like the idea. I remember the one letter the guy wrote from L.A. to Bill, and he was going to come out there. He says, "We'd love to have you come out, Bill, and we'd love to hear your story, but don't talk about those goddamn traditions." They didn't want to hear about it. But we don't like anything that's good for us. And so, the traditions were adopted. And the traditions work because we are all different. We're all unique. Every person in this room is unique. There's never been another you. There never will be another you. And, like Ken Devaney does in the morning, he looks in the mirror and says, "Thank you, God, for me." Because that's the only me there'll ever be. Every one of us is absolutely unique. And the traditions were designed and written so that we could live in harmony with each other, even though we are all unique. Some a little more unique than others. Met a couple this weekend, as a matter of fact. In Clancy's garage years ago, I used to have it fixed over into kind of a little place for a newcomer to flop for a couple of days before they get him into a step house or whatever needed to be done. And across the whole back of the garage was this big banner that says, "But you don't understand. My case is different," And all of us that have been around, we love people to say that. Some new guy say, "Oh, my case is different." "Yeah, you son of a bitch. We'll show you how different you are, you." We just love to stomp all over a guy who says that. And the funny thing is, we are all different. And that's why we have the traditions. I think that there's really two underlying basic principles that underline all of the traditions. These two principles, both of them apply to a tradition. Sometimes a tradition will only apply to one of them. But the two principles are these. The first principle is, it's one drunk talking to another. That's why Alcoholics Anonymous has been successful way far beyond what any other treatment or approach or, has ever. There's more people probably in this little room here today sober and working than 10 treatment centers in the general area of people who have graduated from there being sober. We are by far the only successful recovery program from alcoholism. And it's precisely because of this identification. Almost everybody in this room got sober because we found another person, and I said with my sponsor, "He's like me. He knows how I feel. He knows what I'm talking about. I can't fool him. You can't snow the snowman. You know what I mean? He's been there. He knows. No matter what sick, horrible, terrible thing I would tell him, he would go, yeah, I did that. You can't, you can't fool him. That wonderful story that Keith told over at Seaside there when he forgot where he worked. You remember that story? He's driving to work. A guy has a real important job in a major hospital in Washington, and he's driving to work. He's sober almost a year, and he can't remember where he works. So he called his sponsor. He says, "This is Keith. I don't remember where I work." And his sponsor says, Oh, yeah, that happens. Yeah, that happens. He says, you work at Georgetown University Hospital. You're supposed to start about 9 o'clock. Oh, she says, thank you very much. He says, oh, listen, Keith, by the way, if you ever forget him again, he says, walk around to the front of your car. There's a decal on there that's... Oh, yeah, that happens. Yeah. That happens. You know, the traditions, you know, protect us from each other, you know, in our uniqueness. And you ever notice that meetings, a lot of meetings do that. They'll kind of, birds of a feather flock together. Most people find a meeting where they're comfortable. You know, there's some people like those midnight touchy-feely meetings. They don't do much for me at my age. But people like them. And there are people, you know, love great tunnel meetings where everybody's very sad. Well, you know what I mean. And then there's other meetings. The kind of meetings I like where there's a lot of laughter and carrying on. People kind of gravitate. And, you know, we have that fourth tradition, and isn't that wonderful we have it? Years ago, I was on summer vacation, and I just was kind of bored with my regular meetings. And on Monday night, I drove clear up to L.A. to the Laguna meeting, to the Venice, California meeting, where the debris meets the sea. And that's what they call that meeting. And there were like one car in the parking lot, about 40 Harleys, you know. And everybody said fuck all the time, you know, and that kind of thing. And everybody had tank tops. There was this girl that read the steps. She had this tank top on. She bent over to her, and I never heard a word she read. You know. It was really rowdy. There were dogs in the meeting, you know, and that kind of thing. And but, you know, it was a hell of a good meeting. I got a lot out of it. And on Tuesday night, I went over inland from Oceanside there to a little town called Fallbrook. And, you know, there were about 8 people at the meeting, all in bib overalls. And they talked about the frost getting the rhubarb and, you know, kind of quiet, homey, country kind of meeting. And it was a great meeting. And I went to a different meeting that week every night. I went to San Diego to the old Sixth and Penn meeting, this old-timers meeting, and, you know, where nobody ever smiles. You know, unless somebody has a slip, then they go. You know, and my home group on Thursday nights, kind of like dressed up Venice. And, you know, it was one of the most remarkable experiences I ever had in my life. I really understood the fourth tradition after I'd done that week. And I've done that from time to time, every once in a while, just to remind me that, you know, what I love in AA, the kind of meeting I like, it's not exclusive. You know, everybody doesn't have to think like me. And it was really refreshing. So we're all different. But this is just kind of a weird thing of mine, but I really think the longer I'm sober and the more I'm in AA, the more I think that everybody in AA is either a Bill or a Bob. Have you ever... I mean, I'm the only one who thought of that, but it just seems that way, you know. And, of course, Bill and Bob, there were never two more different people in the history of the world. You know, Bill was just a goddamn promoter. They had to keep pulling a choke chain on him, or I don't know what he would have done with AA. But what did he write? 11 books and 5 jillion pamphlets and just running around promoting and doing and accomplishing and, you know, carrying... just ramming this up or down your throat or up your whatever, you know. And Bob's there in Akron. That'll tell you something about him, huh? He never left Akron. You know, he's famous for, if it works, don't fix it. That's really true, but it's hardly great literature, huh? If it works, don't fix it. And Bill, his most famous quote is, "The good is often the enemy of the best." And all of us at some point in our sobriety have to get in between those two, huh? If it works, don't fix it. And the good is often the enemy of the best. And that's probably the extremes of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they were extremely different. But there has never been any record anywhere, written or old-timers are talking anywhere, that Bill and Bob ever had a serious argument. As a matter of fact, they never even found them that they ever had a cross word for each other. Some of their followers got into it pretty good, but Bill and Bob essentially cherished and loved each other till the day Bob died. Because I think they knew at a very deep level that they needed what the other guy had. They needed each other. They needed the quality that the other had. And I don't know about you, but I'm a Bill. You know, I'm a goer and a doer and a charger around in AA and just always trying to get everything done all at once. And did you ever go to a meeting of all Bobs? Oh, shit. I just want to lob a hand grenade in there and get rid of that bastard. You know, what a pain in the ass they are, you know? The only thing worse is being a meeting of all Bills. Hey, hi, let's call me back. You know. And you know, I got a buddy named Pat at home. His name's not Bob, but he is a Bob. And you know, he thinks that anything that services politics, and you know, he sits there in that home group and he sponsors them, and you know, and he's just a nada. But, you know, sometimes I get all wound up, charging around trying to change the world and blah, blah, and I go over to Pat's office and he pours me a cup of coffee and says, "Why don't you sit down and relax?" And we talk about what's essential and what's true and what's we really need in this program. And whenever I leave, I feel better, you know. He's really good for me. And once in a while I turn him over, you know, the moss on the other side, you know, and I don't know what I'd do without Pat. You know, he makes me angry a lot of times because of his... But at the same time, he's a Bob and I'm a Bill and we need each other. We really do need each other. Some of the traditions of this business... you know what? I dropped... Now that I think of it, I started talking at the beginning about the two basic underlying... The first one is, as I said... It's one drunk talking to another. That's been why AA has been as successful as it's been. Because we have this process of identification. And I don't think I need to be obvious here about the problems that have come up in recent years. Drug addiction, ACA, treatment programs that can get in the way of this business of one drunk talking to another. The traditions that apply there are easy to see. The other basic underlying principle that underlies all the traditions is the one, I just named it Not God. Because, you know, the book that Arthur Kurtz wrote a few years ago was A History of Alcoholics Anonymous, not conference approved, but a very important book as far as I'm concerned, taught me more about my program in terms of the philosophies, how it developed and that kind of thing. Arthur Kurtz wrote this book called Not God, The History of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the title is, that's at some real basic level that Bill and Bob realized as alcoholics that they were, Bill and Bob, not God. And if any group of people in the history of the world prove they're not God, it's us, huh? Our lives are ample demonstration that we are not, you know, godlike. And we have screwed our lives up beyond all measure and anybody's lives who came near us. And so if there ever should be a group of people who realize that they are not God, it's us. And sometimes when you're in service meetings or sometimes where you're in committee meetings or sometimes even at the conference, you will find the majority in AA get the impression that they think that they are God. And the minority gets stepped on and squished and maybe sent back out to die. Or the program suffers because, as time would prove it, the minority was right. And the only time I'm really dangerous is when I know I'm right. You are in great danger if you're around me when I'm positive, absolutely sure that my position is correct. You know, I'm really dangerous then. And I've seen it happen, of course, at the intergroup level, probably more than any other level. At the area assembly level, I've seen it happen so many times. And to a very minor degree, a couple of times at the conference level. Now, I was a delegate to the conference on panel 26, which was 20 goddamn years ago. I can't believe it. You know, so I talked to some guy and he said he's panel 46. I about fell out of my chair because mine was 26. And I think the traditions are demonstrated most beautifully at their best at the conference level. The trustees and the delegates and the people from the General Service Office who meet at the conference every year, to me, the 2 years that I was there really demonstrated how we know we're not God, and so we don't try to cram things down people's throat. You know, if something came up and we would have like a 2/3 majority, but the minority was really talking, we would say, let's put it off another year. We'll wait. We don't ram it down anybody. We won't worry about it. You know what I mean? Because AA doesn't have any emergencies. We have emergencies, but AA doesn't have any emergencies. And that's worked out great for us. And so that was that second underlying principle. So the two principles are, it's one drunk talking to another. The traditions are designed to protect that principle. The reason we are successful, that is one drunk talk, the process of identification. Alcoholism. One drunk talking to another. And the second one is, we better watch out whenever we meet together, whether it be in a group or whether it be in an intergroup or whether it be an area assembly, whether it be at the conference. We have to remember that we are not God and that we don't know best for other people. That the best thing we can do is take care of ourselves, you know. And even if we have a majority, that doesn't make us God. See, and I taught parliamentary law at the college level, so the conference drove me crazy. Because I've learned at the very basic level, if you have 2/3 majority, you're right. Shut up! We got a 2/3 majority. We close debate and you're finished, and that's the way it should be, you know. But at the conference, they had about like 6 guys were opposing this one thing, and they kept talking and talking. And they kept calling on them. I thought, shoot them, shoot them. So they put it off for another year. No big deal, you know, because so many times we have found that the minority is correct. The AA, whenever they read the traditions at our area, they always say that the traditions are to the group's conscience as the steps are to the individual. And of course, the idea of the tradition is that the group is the most important item on the agenda. That if we don't have a group, we're screwed. I can't stay sober. Neither can you. But we can stay sober. And the we is the group that we belong to. And so, you know, the tradition in the long form says, although individual sobriety comes close afterward, the most important thing we have to guard and protect is that group. I don't know if there are people in this room who don't even have a group. A lot of people just go to meetings, don't they? And they don't have a group where they have an allegiance. I have a group, and I belong to that group for 23 years now. And I'm on the cleanup committee for that group. I don't say that to brag, but it's because it's my group. If I don't have a commitment at that meeting, then I don't have a group. If I'm not responsible somehow, I was the secretary 100 years ago, and so now I either be on the cleanup or the setup or, you know, there's the shaking hands when they come in. I try to stay off that now that I've recovered. And you know, I mean, and I vote in that group, and that group's very important to me. And I'm at that group I wasn't there Thursday because I came up here, or I spent the day in the aviation industry's clutches is what I did. I've been better off to stay home. Never mind. And so, you know, those guys in the early days, I imagine, they didn't have any problem knowing how important that group was, huh? How would you like to have been in the first group, say in New York or Akron, huh? Or Los Angeles? I've heard those old-timers in Los Angeles talk. They're all dead now, but I got to hear them share lots of times before they died. There were only 12 of them in that one group in Pasadena, and a guy got drunk, and they knew where he was, so they sent another guy out for him, and he got drunk. So then they sent 2 more to get them, and they got drunk. So next time they called, they said, come and get us. They said, no. You come here. We ain't sending any more scouts out, for Christ's sake. You know? I mean, that's how tenuous it was. That's how scary it was. Can you imagine me in that group? You know, and one person, there's only maybe 8 or 9 of you, and one of them goes out and drinks. Can you imagine the fear? Here you are, this little island of sobriety and the whole oceans of drunkenness. And it's the only chance you have is that little group and you're hanging together. And we've forgotten that, haven't we? What are there, 2 million sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous today? You know, in the city of Eugene, how many groups? In North County, just in North County, San Diego, there are 500 groups. And another 800 in the city of San Diego. What's the difference if somebody gets drunk? Unless it's me. And the traditions say we got to fight to protect these groups and keep them, so that, you know, because we're not God, and we need those groups. What else? Oh yeah, a long time ago I was reading. There's a guy named Eric Hoffer. He's an author that I loved his books. He's not, hell, I don't think he ever got sober. I don't even know if he's an alcoholic, but he sounds like one. I've always thought Mother Teresa was an alcoholic, you know. Well, she likes to hang around with lower companions all the time, you know. The priest still gone? But I was Eric Hoffer. He has nothing to do with the program, but very brilliant man, a sociologist. He worked on this as a stevedore all his life, and self-educated and wrote some terrific books. One of his books he wrote was called A True Believer. You know, and he talked about all the different people in the world that are true believers, the fundamentalists of the world. And I'm kind of a true believer in AA myself. I don't know about you. But he had this one thing in this, he was talking about, I had a little quote, and he said, in America, every great movement has become a cult or a corporation. I went, This was maybe 10, 12 years ago when I read this, but I thought, oh, shit. You know, and there's kind of evidence on each way, isn't there, with AA? The first thing I thought about was Alcoholics Anonymous as soon as I read it. A cult or a corporation. And we have some cultists around, don't we? The leaders that, you know, that a guru that has a big following. There's several in Southern California. I won't name them. You know who they are. But the ones I know, the big gurus in Southern California, they're very much oriented around the program. You know, their group has a intergroup rep and a GSR, and hell, the one group sends about $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a year to General Service Office just through birthday contributions. And they're very much around the steps and very much around the traditions. And I don't know, I haven't been everywhere around the country, but I have read about groups that got led away from the program by some guru who decided he had his own particular brand of AA, and everybody that followed him, they all ended up either coming back to AA or getting drunk, one of the two, or both, getting drunk and coming back to AA. But, you know, I've noticed in Southern California, there's people who are anti-guru, and they're more scary than the gurus. There's one guy down in San Diego, I used to sponsor him, I don't sponsor him anymore, but he hated Clancy, just hated Clancy. And he would go to, if Clancy talked within 50 miles, he would go to the meeting, so he could get up in the middle and walk out. Oh, he got a big snort out of that, you know what I mean? I told him, George, do you realize the power you're giving that man over your life? Never mind, I'll that son of a bitch, you know what I mean? That's dangerous when a guy hates somebody that badly, you know what I mean? And then, of course, a corporation, there's probably a lot of people in this room who are a little worried about that now. A little shorty up in Washington, he used to always worry about the corporation of AA. You know, that the General Service Office and the trustees will run away with our program and, you know, and do things. And they do a lot of stuff I know that piss me off. This, you know, too much hanging around with the NCA, the National Council of Alcoholism, that kind of thing. Too much buttering up the institutions, that kind of thing. That's just my opinion, and they don't really ask my opinion very often. But, you know, well, when you think about that, huh? Can you imagine making a corporation out of anarchists? You know, if three of us agree on something, it's called a coalition. You know, you just get three people to agree on it, and you can't get us to agree on it. I really don't see that you can ever make a corporation out of AA. And number one, because we have the great safeguard, the purse strings, as the 12 and 12 calls it. We have the power of the purse strings. I mean, if the General Service Office and the trustees ever made us mad enough, and enough of us just quit sending in the money from the groups, they would dry up and go away. Except if we allow the literature to become supportive, the sole support of the General Service Office and the conference. If we ever allow that to where they can get along fine without us in the groups, if we don't send any money at all, they make enough money on the books and the pamphlets and that sort of thing, then they wouldn't have to listen much to what we have to say. And, you know, I guess we could become a corporation then. But it's hard to be a corporation, though, because of that first principle I was talking about. At some level, we all know that if General Service Office disappeared tomorrow, if every area assembly disappeared tomorrow, if every intergroup disappeared, everybody in this room, we could stay sober because we have each other. It would be very difficult. And over a period of time, we'd have to start all over and get books published and that kind of thing again. But we know that there's two of us left. We can stay sober because we have that principle of identification with each other. And so, really, you know, it'll never become a corporation because we don't really think that much about it, do we? It's not that big a deal. In the final analysis, it's unnecessary. I'm going to get a little controversial here. I don't want to be controversial. Because all my life I was controversial, weren't you? I mean, that was my life's ambition, was to be controversial. I always thought controversial and important meant the same thing. No. I was a political radical. You know, my political philosophy was blow it up or burn it down. I didn't really give a shit which. I used to say I was for peace. And if you weren't for peace, I'd kill you. And, you know, and I was a left-wing radical nut. When I first got sober, that was one of the great things. All the guys that got sober with me were all right-wing political nuts. And my sponsor had a car full of us. And we would get started on politics in the car, and Jesus, and he'd pull the car over and say, "Shut up! All of you, shut up! Nobody's going to talk politics in this goddamn car anymore!" Yeah. So we all said, okay. And Nixon was the president then, and he lived in San Clemente. You know, had that home in San Clemente, and a big sign said, "Home of President Nixon." That came down right after Watergate. And we would be riding along, about 7 of us in a car, going north to a meeting in Los Angeles, see? And we'd be all in the back seat, and then all these guys, we'd get to Nixon's house, you know. They'd all look at each other and go. And I'd go off. "Why, you sons of bitches!" And then Bill would get mad at me. "Shut up, Cliff, you're causing trouble back there." You know? Oh, they love that. Bunch of rednecks. But, as I say, so after I was, you know, AA, not very long, I realized that controversial doesn't mean important. It just means controversial. It's been my experience that the radicals of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the guys who are always objecting to everything, end up getting drunk, almost all of them. A few of them become gurus before they get drunk. A few of them become gurus and really strong. You know, a lot of nuts in AA have done great things to make the program better. But generally speaking, the revolutionaries of Alcoholics Anonymous end up drinking. Just my experience just watching them. And so I try not to be controversial. I remember when I was delegate, they had that, the first year I was delegate, that's the only time I've ever really been controversial. They had this, the gay wanted to have enlisted in the World Directory, they wanted to list gay meetings as gay meetings. And I was against it. I felt like, by God, if you know, our sexual problems are not part of AA and blah, blah. I was a homophobic is what I was, but at the time, it seemed like, oh, that would be terrible. The AA would die if we ever did that. And so I argued against it on the floor and screamed and yelled and voted no, and it passed. So I was really pissed. They had ignored my advice. And I went back home, and I got a hold of Al. And Al and I started an impotent men's group. We were the only two yo-yos that were dumb enough to do it. And we got $20 together and sent it off to New York. Bob Pearson called me a couple of days later and said, "What are you doing now, Cliff? For Christ, what are you doing?" "No," I said, "by God, we're going to have sexual orientation be the big deal. We're going to have a goddamn impotent men's group, too. We got rights here." We had this one gal, we tried to get her to start a frigid women's group. But nobody would have believed Phyllis. Sometimes I think they would have thought it was an Al-Anon meeting. So, no. Just kidding. If there's any spies here, just kidding. But anyway, it went ahead and they ignored me, and it's turned out to be a wonderful thing. It's really turned out to be a wonderful thing for AA. A person who's gay in a town can look in the directory and say, "Here's a gay group," and I can go there. And birds of a feather, and I can fit, and I can belong, and everything's fine. And a person who's not gay in a strange town can look and say, "That's a gay group. I don't want to go there. That's for them, not for me," and they can find another meeting. And it turned out to be perfect, and I was wrong. And generally speaking, since that time in AA, when I'm wrong, and I say, "Okay, the majority wants it. It's okay to me," and I just get in line and march, and try not to be a revolutionary. Try very hard not to be somebody who's always trying to get it my way. Every drinking drunk, wants his way, and he wants it yesterday. That isn't what I was talking about there. Maybe a third principle underlying the third one would be courtesy. If you read the traditions, and that's the one that seems to be the most violated that I see in a lot of meetings today and a lot of groups today, is this business of just being courteous. As you guys have been to me this weekend. It's just absolutely courteous. You go to a meeting and there's something going on all the time. There's people talking, and there's people sitting around. Or I was talking last night, some of the people didn't know what I was talking about. At a lot of meetings in Southern California, when the guy's reading chapter 5 and he gets to the steps, and he's going to read 1, and then everybody in the crowd hollers out 1, and then the guy reads step 1, and they wait, and then they say 2. And of course, one of their real funny things is after they get through 12, when he finishes reading 12, they say 13. And their little minds are frozen there in self, so they didn't hear what the hell's being read. They're getting ready to say whatever the next number is. And then in the part of chapter 5, when you get to say the point is, just then they get to the guy hollers out, "What's the point?" And it takes a lot of concentration to do that. And you have to ignore whatever's being read so that you can be sure to be the one that gets that in. That's what I was raving about last night. This rudeness. I was talking in a meeting a little while back, and I finally just stopped and said, "What is this Grand Central Station here?" There was somebody just going all the time. Everybody just moving around. It looked like a goddamn train station. And then they all sat and listened, but they were mad, which was all right with me. And so courtesy, could be a real big one. Every drinking drunk is absolutely consumed with self. And the traditions really try to show us that, we got to look at, we're all unique, and so we have to protect each other's uniqueness. And we have to protect each other, and we have to keep our own self in some kind of control so that the group can function. And the group is the most important aspect, and it needs it. Okay. A lot of the treatment centers almost like take over an AA meeting. In the Orange County area, there's a lot of meetings that meet in hospitals, and they, everybody who seems to graduate from that treatment center then goes to meetings at that treatment center, like for as long as they last in sobriety, and they'll take a cake and they'll spend 5 minutes thanking the treatment center and a minute thanking AA. And the identification becomes just, one becomes a part of the other. A lot of clubs that seems to happen. There's a club in my area where they won't put the schedule out for all the other meetings. They just have the club schedule there. A person can come in there and never know that there's AA out there. that except in the club, and that business of trying to squeeze out, for their own selves, which is very much anti-tradition. Tradition 3 is kind of a warning to a lot of the old timers. Traditions, after a while, applied to me personally. When I was first new, Bill used to drive me every week. It's only 35 miles up to Laguna. And there was a men's stag on Monday night in Laguna Beach when I got sober that was, honest to God, it was almost like the heart of it. Chuck C. was there every week. Dr. Paul was fairly new then. And there was a guy named Jack Schaefer who was one of the original members in Los Angeles. A guy named Turk who later moved over to Arizona where he died. He was one of the original members. I mean, there were like 35 guys in the room, and there were about 5,000 years of sobriety, it seemed to me. And they loved me. They loved it when Bill would bring me. He brought me every week. They used to watch. They said, he's got the school teacher. Good, because I was a whiner. And they loved a whiner to come to the meeting, And they'd wait a little while and they'd say, Cliff, do you have something? And whine, 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 whine. And then they'd tear my ass off. They would just rip me a new one, you know what I mean? And God, they would hurt my feelings. And they just loved it, They were just so glad when I'd come every week. And one night, Bill and I were coming back. We just left the meeting. We were driving down at that beautiful stretch of the highway. There's the ocean's on your right there. And the blue Pacific had the moon shining on it. And I was about in tears. And I told Bill that those guys did not realize that I'm sensitive. And he let it go. And I mean, probably about the 8th time I said it. Okay? His knuckles are getting white on the wheels. And usually he yelled at me. But that time he just was very quiet. He turned to me and he said, Cliff, let's get this straight. You are not sensitive. You are an immature son of a bitch. And I said, well, I kind of prefer sensitive. So No. And boy, has that become my rallying cry at Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not sensitive. I am immature. I am so immature that it will kill me if I don't do something about it. And in the second section, I'm going to be talking a little bit, and you're going to do some talking too, about step 6 and about step 7. Because in my experience, that if I don't change, I can't stay here. I mean, I was just too far out there. I've got to change or I'll die. That's all there is to it. And when I got it in the context of, rather than something really philosophical, I mean, just say, Cliff, you're immature. Babies are immature. His Majesty the baby, Howard calls it. And a baby is cute. They're so immature. You know what I mean? But when you're 43, it's time to try to grow up a little bit. And the steps will grow you up if you let them. And a good sponsor will grow you up whether you want to or not. But he said I was immature. And then after I got into service and I started studying the traditions, I realized that traditions have a lot to do with helping me with my immaturity. One of the things that God did for me, just to backtrack a little bit, after I gave up the battle to keep the gays from having their own meeting, 2 lesbian women asked me to sponsor them within a month. And I said, I don't sponsor women. And they said, so? And you said God doesn't know what He's doing, huh? I sponsored those 2 gals, and they were the delight of my life. I learned so much from those 2 gals. They taught me about tolerance. They taught me about loving for fun and for free. And they taught me about having respect for people who were different than me. They taught me the great life. It was within a month after I gave up the fight, And they just, they changed my whole program of action. And so you say God doesn't have a sense of humor, huh? Be careful what you pray for. Oh, geez, well, you get it. Huh? But see, I found out, the traditions helped me find out, When I got here, I wouldn't, if you would have told me I was any of these things, I probably would have punched you. Because I found that I was intolerant. Probably none of you have had that problem. Now see, what faked me out is that I've always been a radical and a revolutionary. I'm for the people. You know what I mean? I love humanity, but I hate people. Typical socialist. I love humanity, but I hate people. And you know, I always fought for the rights of the underdog and blah, 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 blah. You know, and if you would have said you're an intolerant person, I really would have punched you. That just drove me crazy. But I found out a secret about myself is that I am only intolerant. The only time it bothers me is if you don't agree with me. That's the only way I'm intolerant, is if you don't agree with me. Which pretty much takes in the world, doesn't it? And I found I was one of the most intolerant people in the world. And in AA, I've got to learn to have some tolerance, you know, because you are unique, you are different, you're coming from a whole different place, your insanity doesn't match mine exactly, and so I have to learn not to be, you know, to be tolerant of everything, of everybody, of anything. And the traditions, of course, preach that and push that. The idea of letting the other people, you know, the minority has the rights. We don't, you know, the group's the most important thing. We have to fit ourselves into the group no matter what we are and who the other members of the group are. And secondly, I was surprised to find out that I was undependable. You know, I would always told you that since I was such a functioning alcoholic that I was on the ball and I was always there. But, you know, I let down anybody who really needed me in my whole life. Anybody that absolutely had to have me, my attention and my devotion or whatever it was, I let them down. I was the most undependable person in the history of the world. And those of you who sponsor people know that you have to give up being undependable. You know, when a guy calls, you got to be there. And when the phone rings at 1 o'clock in the morning and it's a drunken newcomer, you got to be there. I mean, you know, I work in central office every one afternoon or one morning a week. I've done it for years and years. And boy, you find out about AA when you work in the central office. I'll go through that card file and I'll call some guy and I'll say, John, there's this guy, you know, he's in a phone booth down in the... And John will say, oh, I'm sorry, I have to do my laundry today. I'm not joking. I've actually heard that excuse. I said, well, I hope your goddamn clothes get clean, John. Take his card and tear it up and throw it away, you know. I mean, you know, that comes first. That comes before anything. I am dependable. Alcoholics Anonymous can depend on me. As far as I know, I have... Well, that's not so. My wife had a person she was working with years ago. And that woman was a hysteric. And she would call, and she would be sobbing, and really frightening. You know, when somebody calls and their voice is so shaky you can barely understand. But the woman said she wanted Al-Anon, but she wouldn't go to Al-Anon meetings. You know? And she would call my wife and harangue her, and you know, my wife worked with her and worked with her and worked with her. My wife finally decided this person doesn't want the program. She's an hysteric. She has to call and go into hysterics. And I was home alone one evening, and the phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and this woman's on there sobbing and crying. And I had talked to her several times when I was home, and I was watching a show that I really liked, and I just really couldn't be bothered with this goddamn hysterical woman. And I said, why don't you call Katie? And I hung up. And it wasn't that woman. It was a young woman that my wife sponsored who had been raped in her home. And she was in a closet. She didn't know if the guy was still there. She dragged the phone in the closet and called me. And I told her to call Katie. And she called Katie, and the cops got there, and she was all right. Can you imagine being in that closet, just been raped brutally 3 or 4 times? And this son of a bitch on the other line says, call Katie. A logical thing that happened, but I've never forgotten that. So I let AA and I let Al-Anon down. That done it. But generally speaking, I would say I did not. I just, all of a sudden, you know, better not be sin. I never let AA or Al-Anon down because I have. I want to be dependable. That's part of growing up to me. If I have a responsibility to a meeting, I'm there. If you know, and the people that I sponsor that I see being successful are the ones who, you know, follow through and give up that part of their immaturity. As I was talking about trying to be controversial when I first came in, and that's part of that whole package of the huge ego that all of us bring here. That probably is the aspect of it that the traditions talk to the most, to tell us that how important our group is, that we have to surrender our own ego. I'm sure a lot of you have done some service work, haven't you? And you'll go to different meetings. There's these old gray-haired guys that are just so goddamn serene, you know. And they say, "Well, I'll take life as it comes." Blah. And then you go to a service meeting with the son of a bitch, and he, "Shut up! I'm getting my way here, Rabbit!" And they're all banging heads. It's terrifying when you're new. You know, see all these giants of AA tearing each other's asses off in the middle of the meeting. But most guys that have been around a long time, you know, their ego is there, but at the same time, they're willing to give up whatever they have to give up for the good of the whole. And I think for people like us who are immature, and of course immaturity, a big part of that is that outmoded ego that thinks that we're the most important thing that ever was born. To be able to surrender any portion of that is such a victory for me. Every time that I really have something that I really think is more important than anybody else, and I let it go because it would be the best thing for the group. That's always so, I always carry that away, and I feel so much better about myself. And so when I got to AA, I had the steps, and the steps allowed me to grow up, provided me the method by which I could grow up some, reduce my level of immaturity to where I live in the world reasonably comfortably most of the time. And then the traditions protected you from me and me from you until we got to where we could grow up enough and take care of ourselves. And that's what the traditions are all about, is surrender again to the good of the group, to the good of the whole. That the minority sometimes can be right and we have to let them be it. That we can have our own kinds of meetings and we don't have to worry about what the other guy does. That we adjust to one another so that we can all be comfortable. If you ever haven't been a student of the traditions, I would advise you to do it. I would advise you to get the 12 and 12, and at the very least, read them all. Read them all. And if you can, if you have a 12 and 12 group in your area, which we had for many years, I think I learned more about myself in the study of the traditions than just about anything in the program. And for those of you who have a service life, you'll find that the traditions are immeasurably important there. So that's all I have. Thanks, Paul. I didn't have time to get spiritual. My name is Cliff. I'm an alcoholic. I'm not going to share very long here. We're going to have a little red ball. I'll call on somebody, and then whoever I call on will call on somebody else, and so forth. And you can feel free to refuse or snivel, whatever you want to do. We'll loathe you and despise you the rest of the weekend, but you can turn it down if you want to. One thing somebody told me that there was a point I was going to make and lost it, which I seem to have done a lot this weekend. When I was talking about the two basic traditions or concepts that underline the 12 traditions, this business of not God, that kind of thing, in recent years in AA, there have been an awful lot of, I will call them the Oracle of Delphi bunch. In ancient Greece, they had this cave at Delphi, and people would go and shout their questions into the cave, and they needed answers for, and there were a lot of noises in the cave, wind blowing and water running and that kind of thing. It was just noises, but lucky for the people that needed help, there were these priests of Delphi that stood at the head of the cave, the opening of the cave, and they would interpret what the cave was saying. And so the priest would listen and say, well, what the oracle wants you to do, and then you would go your way. And it seems to me that we've had an awful lot of oracle at Delphi in the last few years. People are going to explain this program that reads at the 9th grade level, going to explain this program to us. Joe and Charlie were the precursors of this, and I'm not knocking Joe and Charlie. I enjoy Joe and Charlie. Whenever they're in my area, I try to go through the book with them. And Charlie, is not just an acquaintance; he's a good friend. And I've met Joe a lot of times, although there's another Joe now. But there have been a whole lot of people who've kind of followed Joe and Charlie, who are the oracles at Delphi. They're going to explain what this book really means, and they develop all kinds of study guides. And there was a guy in Texas, who had on the sexual inventory. He had some questions. I got horny just reading the questions. Jesus, I was sitting there going, oh God, I never did that. I never thought of that. And just organized to the point, you had to go to these people. If you're going to get sober, you have to go to these people, and they take you through the steps. My sponsor took me through the steps, and I had something that I wanted to share with that. A while back, the trustees studied this, and they were talking about giving permission to people to develop these study guides for AA. This is our trustees, the ones that are elected by the conference, the 21, 14 alcoholics and 7 non-alcoholics who actually govern AA, who make the daily decisions for AA. They said, we don't need another person or institution to think for us. In fact, this could be a very bad thing. Part of the beauty and magic of AA is that persons from all walks of life with varied backgrounds may benefit from the big book, the steps, the traditions, and the concepts from their own point of view. Placing guidelines on paper seems to say, this is the way, the only way. The authors of this priceless material knew what they were doing. Their words require study, not interpretation. I see our literature, particularly the books, as being study guides. This book is a study guide. It's a textbook. All you got to do is, read it and follow it. So I'm glad to see that the board agrees with me. I wouldn't be reading if it didn't, huh? Did you read that one in the Grapevine where the guy said, the speaker said, the only authority in AA is the big book? He said, that's not so. The traditions actually read, they make a very clear statement about authority in AA. Tradition 2 states that there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as He expresses Himself in our group conscience. That's why we belong to groups. So we'll have a group conscience. And that's the only authority in AA, is the group conscience is God, as expressed by our group conscience. And so the Oracle of Delphi, luckily or unluckily, whatever way you want to look at it, the big Oracle of Delphi, the one that had that study guide I was talking about, recently got drunk. I want to say good, but I don't say that because I don't want anybody to be drunk. Nobody. But it's interesting to me that, that this Oracle has fallen. That's just one of them, so I don't know. My advice is, if you want advice from me, is to follow what the big book says. Just read the goddamn thing and do it. And get a sponsor who believes that way too. All right, so now I'm finished with the traditions finally.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.